Okay, so imagine this. You're scrolling through a new professional network, right? Or maybe you're meeting a potential collaborator, first time on a video call.
Mm-hmm.
Before they even say a word, before you've even glanced at their LinkedIn profile, your brain, it's already made this huge, potentially life-altering decision about them. What is that decision?
It's trust. Or, well, trustworthiness. And that speed you mentioned, that's really the core of what we've been looking into.
All right.
The research we've surveyed today, it's pretty clear. We form these really complex impressions about whether we can trust someone in, like, milliseconds.
Milliseconds. That's,
Eh,
wow.
Yeah, and it's often based purely on these immediate, sometimes totally unconscious cues, like, just their face or the sound of their voice.
It is, frankly, kind of terrifyingly fast. So, okay, before we get into all the biases and stuff, let's set the stage. Scientifically speaking, what exactly is trust? What are we diving into here?
Right. So when researchers talk about trust, they generally define it as the willingness to make yourself vulnerable to what another person might do.
Vulnerable. Okay.
Yeah, and it's not about just like blind faith. This definition, it cuts across psychology, neuroscience, even economics, and it really highlights two main things.
Which are?
First, there's this sort of cognitive evaluation you do, like assessing their ability, their character. And second, there's the actual decision to accept some level of risk based on that evaluation. It involves thinking and feeling.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's start with the hard science. Segment 1, the trust cocktail. If this trust thing is so fundamental, so fast, what's going on in our brains chemically?
Okay, well, the biggest wow fact right off the bat is probably the oxytocin system.
Ah, the trust hormone, right, or the love hormone.
Yeah, it gets called a lot of things, but trust hormone fits pretty well here. Its function is pretty profound. It gets released during positive social stuff, shaking hands, a friendly chat.
Okay.
And the key thing, it stays active in the brain for about 30 minutes after it's released.
30 minutes. So wait, if you have like a genuinely good handshake or a really positive first minute of a meeting, you've basically given yourself and maybe them this little 30-minute chemical boost for collaboration.
That's pretty much it, yeah. And the research backs this up. It seems to be causal. There are studies where they gave people synthetic oxytocin.
Yeah.
And it clearly led to more trust, more generosity, just more pro-social behavior overall. It's fascinating. Chemically kind of reduces that boundary between me and you, makes us see others as more in our group.
But it's not just a chemical dump, right? Our brain must be doing some calculating somewhere. Is there like a specific trust headquarters in the brain?
Not really one spot. It's definitely more of a network. Think of it like a team effort between the rational brain and the emotional brain.
Okay.
So you've got the prefrontal cortex that's acting like your high-level analyst. It's handling the risk assessment, the sort of rational decision-making about trust, the should I trust this person?
These are the logic center.
Yeah, exactly. But then the immediate gut-level emotional reaction, that comes mainly from the amygdala. It's doing that super fast check, threat or safety, friend or foe.
And connecting this back,
Yeah.
this whole system, it boosts our ability to empathize,
Right.
Which feels like it must be the absolute foundation for trust.
It really is fundamental. Oxytocin is thought to boost those pro-social behaviors largely by enhancing empathy. And the sources we looked at, they actually break empathy down into 3 different types. There's empathic distress, empathic concern, and then perspective taking, being able to understand both cognitively and emotionally and share someone else's feelings. That's absolutely crucial for building real lasting trust.
Okay, now let's shift gears to segment 2. This is where we get into how incredibly biased we are. And this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because we judge trust based on sight and sound using cues that are often completely unfair. So lay it on us. What does the ideal trustworthy face look like, according to the science?
Okay, so the research points to a surprisingly specific template. The face rated most trustworthy tends to have a U-shaped mouth.
U-shaped.
Yeah, like a gentle curve upwards, and eyes that form an almost surprised look, kind of wide open.
Surprised.
It signals openness, non-threatening, And conversely, the least trustworthy face. That usually has features we associate with anger, like the mouth edges curled downwards.
It sounds like we're basically rewarding people who look perpetually astonished, maybe even a bit naive. If we're judging based on a surprised look, aren't we kind of setting ourselves up to be, well, taken advantage of?
That's a really interesting point. I think it's more about that perceived openness and the lack of any perceived threat. That's the key signal. But what's also fascinating is, while we might look for those specific features, we also have this preference for, well, average faces.
Average. Like plain.
Kind of, yeah. Research on something called facial typicality shows that more typical-looking, or average, faces are seen as more trustworthy. The idea is they signal familiarity, safety. Predictable equals safe in our brain's calculation.
Okay, average is safe, but there's one specific measurement, right? Something about face shape that consistently signals maybe potential danger, especially in men.
Ah, yes. You're talking about the facial width-to-height ratio, the FWHR.
Right.
This one shows up really robustly in the data. Men who have a greater FWHR, basically, wider, more square-shaped faces relative to their height, they are consistently perceived as less trustworthy. And what's more, in experiments like those economic games, they're actually more likely to exploit trust.
Why is that?
Well, the ratio is often linked, perceptually at least, with higher levels of perceived dominance and aggression.
So the classic movie villain, look, the square jaw, the wide face, it's actually sort of backed up by facial metrics.
Pretty much, yeah. It's a subconscious bias.
And just thinking about fairness, are women generally judged differently than men, just initially?
Yes, that's another consistent finding. Generally speaking, across a lot of studies, women tend to be rated as having a higher baseline level of trustworthiness than men.
Huh. So women might start with a slight sort of trust advantage.
It seems that way, yeah. At least in terms of initial perception, they might be perceived as more cooperative right off the bat.
Okay, let's move from sight to sound. What about voices? What makes a voice sound trustworthy?
Voice pitch is interesting because it's very context dependent. But for male voices, generally a higher pitch is perceived as more trustworthy, especially in cooperative situations.
Higher, not lower. I would have thought a deep voice sounds more commanding, maybe more trustworthy.
It sounds more dominant, maybe authoritative. But the theory here is that a higher pitch might correlate with lower perceived testosterone levels, so it signals less aggression, maybe more willingness to cooperate.
So that deep, gravelly movie trailer voice, it might sound powerful, but to our ancient hindbrain, it might actually signal warning, competitive risk.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. And for both men and women, there's one universal red flag you can actually control: speaking too fast. Yeah, fast speaking rates are consistently linked with the lowest trustworthiness ratings. If you rush your words, people tend to think you seem, well, shifty or nervous or like you're trying to pull a fast one.
Okay, slow down. Got it. What about presentation? Smiles, clothes, does that stuff matter?
Oh, definitely. Smiles, but only the real ones. Genuine Duchenne smiles, the ones that crinkle up the corners of your eyes.
Right, the eye crinkles.
Those significantly boost trustworthiness. But a fake smile or controlled smile that only uses the mouth muscles, that can actually decrease your credibility compared to just having a neutral expression.
Wow, okay. So better no smile than a fake smile.
Seems that way. And clothes. Yes, the attire effect is real. Professional clothing consistently boosts perceptions of competence and trustworthiness. Specifically, things like well-tailored suits, especially in darker, more subdued professional colors, think navy, charcoal gray, maybe deep burgundy, they signal competence.
So wear the fitted navy suit, smile with your eyes, and talk slowly. Get in the picture.
Almost. Just watch the eyes. Eye contact is tricky.
How so?
Well, direct eye contact is great for building trust in cooperative settings. It signals engagement, openness. But if you're in a competitive situation like a negotiation or maybe even an argument, maintaining intense direct eye contact can actually be interpreted as a sign of competitive behavior or even deceit. It can feel confrontational. So context is everything there.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, let's broaden out. Segment 3, trust in the wild. How does all this biological wiring, these quick judgments, how does it translate into the real world? Starting with, like, childhood, how early does this start?
Oh, it starts incredibly early. We have to talk about Erik Erikson's theory here. He identified trust versus mistrust as the very first, the most fundamental stage of human psychosocial development.
The first stage.
The first one. This happens in roughly the first 18 months of life. Successfully navigating this stage, basically, learning whether the world and your caregivers are reliable and safe, forms the literal operating system for all your future relationships and even your personality.
Wow. So it's like the original software install for how we relate to everyone.
That's a perfect analogy. It's that foundational.
Okay, so fast forward from infancy. Let's look at the workplace. Trust there feels absolutely crucial, often the difference between teams that soar and teams that just crash.
Absolutely. The implications for organizations are huge. Research, for instance, by the Reina partners, highlights 3 really critical dimensions of trust needed for workplace success.
What are they?
First is trust of character, basically. Do people do what they say they'll do? Reliability, integrity. Second is trust of communication. Is the dialogue open, honest, transparent? Can people speak truthfully? And third is trust of capability. Are people competent? Do they have the skills and knowledge to do the job?
Character, communication, capability. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And the payoff for getting this right, it's pretty big, isn't it?
Oh, it's massive. Some studies show organizations with really high levels of trust see things like a 400% increase in performance.
400%.
Yeah. And huge jumps in customer loyalty, too, like up to 88%.
Yeah.
So the strategies that build this, things like transparent communication, managers actually following through on commitments, and really importantly, creating psychological safety.
Psychological safety, meaning
Meaning people feel safe enough to take risks, to voice concerns, even to admit mistakes without fearing they'll be punished or humiliated. That's huge for trust.
right. Okay, so we established earlier that trust involves calculated risk. It's not just blind faith. How do scientists actually measure that calculation in the lab?
The main tool they use is called the trust game. It was developed back in 1995 by Berg and colleagues, and it's become like the standard way to study this experimentally.
How does it work?
It's pretty simple, actually. You have two participants. One is the truster, the other is the trustee. The truster gets some money, say $10. They can choose to send some, all, or none of it to the trustee.
Okay.
Whatever amount they send gets multiplied and usually tripled. So if they send $10, the trustee receives $30. Then the trustee decides how much of that $30, if any, to send back to the original truster.
Ah, okay. So the amount the first person sends. That's the measure of their trust, their willingness to take a risk.
Exactly. It neatly quantifies their risk attitude and their expectation of the other person's reciprocity. It confirms trust is a behavior rooted in that calculated exposure to vulnerability.
That model, turning this very human social thing into a sort of mathematical game that feels like a perfect bridge to our next section. Segment 4, trust in the machine age. If we can model risk in a game, can we actually computationally model trust itself?
It's shocking, but yes. And with startling accuracy, there's research out of MIT where they developed these things called hidden Markov models, or HMMs.
Okay, sounds complex.
It is, but the upshot is these models were able to predict people's trust levels better than other humans could.
Better than humans. How?
They weren't analyzing personality or what people said. They were analyzing tiny, nonverbal micro-behaviors. Things like how often someone touches their face, subtle leaning patterns, how they position their arms, things we do completely unconsciously.
That's genuinely a moment of future shock right there. A machine watches my little fidgets and knows if I'm trustworthy better than my colleague does. Maybe better than I know.
It suggests that even our unconscious movements aren't random. They follow these predictable sequences over time that a machine can actually learn to decode. And the implications are huge, obviously.
Yeah, I'm thinking AI assistants, how robots interact with us.
Exactly, human automation interaction. But also, think about social surveillance. If a system can predict trust in a negotiation, could it rate job candidates based on micro behaviors they don't even know they're doing?
Oof. Yeah, that definitely raises some serious questions about data privacy, fairness, especially in high-stakes situations like hiring or even law enforcement. And it's also crucial to remember, right, that this whole foundation of trust, how we express it, how much we offer, it isn't universal across the globe.
Not at all. That's a really important point. The sources clearly note that general trust levels vary dramatically between countries.
Right.
Well, you look at somewhere like Denmark, general societal trust is reported around 74%, super high. But then you look at a country like Brazil, and it's down around 3%.
Wow, 74% versus 3%. That's a massive difference.
It reflects profoundly different cultural norms, history, experiences with institutions, attitudes about cooperation, and just general feelings of societal security. Even things like eye contact norms vary a lot culturally.
Okay, definitely something to keep in mind. Right, it feels like time for our lightning round. Let's boil down the key takeaways from this deep dive before we leave everyone with a final thought.
Let's do it. Distilling the essence.
Okay, takeaway 1. Trust is biological and foundational. It literally starts with chemicals like oxytocin, maybe giving us that 30-minute cooperation window, and the groundwork is laid in the first 18 months of life, setting our whole relationship trajectory.
Takeaway 2. Trust is biased and fast. Our judgments are automatic, often unfair, based on cues like facial averageness, where typical faces win and how fast someone talks. Remember, speaking fast, big credibility killer. And yes, statistically, women get a slightly higher initial trust rating.
And takeaway 3. Trust is profitable, seriously profitable. Investing in those three C's, character, communication, and capability in the workplace yields massive returns, like that potential 400% performance boost in high-trust companies.
Absolutely. And pulling it all together, trust isn't just one thing. It's this dynamic dance between our neurochemistry, our earliest life experiences, and all these subtle situational cues we pick up on. Understanding how these pieces fit together is crucial, not just for business, but think about healthcare too, that trust between a patient and doctor. The data shows it's a key predictor of how well treatment actually works.
Okay, so given everything we've talked about, especially that mind-blowing MIT study, scientists have trained computers to predict how trustworthy we seem better than we can, just by watching our unconscious body language, those little ticks and leans. This raises a really powerful question for you, the listener, to chew on. Should our focus be on trying to consciously minimize our own innate, often flawed, split-second biases about others? Or should we maybe leverage this scientific understanding to become, well, masters of projecting an image of trustworthy competence ourselves? Something to think about. That's your deep dive homework for this time.